success stories. This is not who we are. We are better than this. If the goal is to destroy the goose that laid the golden egg, then by all means, this hearing is a good beginning. For me, I see the fabulous success of Starbucks, and I understand that the luxury to spend an extraordinary amount of money for a cup of coffee is a testament to capitalism. It's a testament to the fact that we have enough money that we can do that. When I walk in Starbucks, I don't see billionaires buying coffee. I see everyone from top to bottom in there paying for the coffee because they've decided the quality is worth it. But I don't want to be part of any witch hunt that vilifies any American business. So count me out. Count me as one who is ecstatic that Starbucks is an American success story, and I'll have no part in trashing their success. तुम्हें दिल निसार करते
our party leader, the other principals, ladies and gentlemen, I will be very brief. First of all, I want to thank you for sparing time to come here today. I knew we had very short time since we were approaching Easter, but we thought it would be important to talk to you as fast as possible before Easter. And we thought the easiest people to call were the group that is here. Let others who have been with us all along think that we have forgotten them. We are organizing, as you know, the family of Asimio had over 28 parties. Some of them never managed to have members of parliament. But in one way or another, they have representation at the county level. We are going to invite all of them because they have been part of this process so that we are able to brief them what we have done. I want also to take this opportunity to thank the leaders that are here. The leaders who are here, they have really spent their time the last 2 months sleeping late, planning how to go with the maandamano. They have gone through tear gas, the worst of it. Clap for them. This is a journey that we have to do together. But lastly, our party leader has gone through the key issues. Others might arise as we move on with the negotiation. But so long as the server is not open, we will not have sorted the problem of election injustices in this country. Because we have had disputes before. 2007, 2008, you remember how many people we lost. We lost over 1,000 people in this country. 2013, it was the same. 2017 is the same. 2022, same. So we don't need this again in 2027. to 2027. And you have been given an opportunity to sort out this. And in any disease, if a doctor has to treat it, he must know what disease you are suffering from. He must carry out tests to know before he subscribes the medicine you have chosen. So that's why you are saying that if we have to come up with proper laws that will help us have free and fair election in future, the server must be open. And secondly, the issue of cost of living. And these two are the most critical. Others can be added here and there. But these two are critical. Because sorting out the issue of cost of living is the easiest. You just reintroduce subsidies and people will be stable for the few months until we have harvesting, which will come in the next 3 or 4 months. We'll have enough. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to appreciate you as the chairman of the Executive Council of ASMIO, that this is a journey that we must be together, and I thank very much, having been a former governor, the governors who have worked with us up to this moment. They have supported us, and you people must keep supporting us so that we are able to achieve our objective. Kwa hayo machache, Bwana Kioni, karibu na wewe useme yako.
She's on the Trade Subcommittee of Ways and Means, and that's one of the few power committees in the Congress. Congresswoman Murphy comes with a very interesting background to having been an educator, a businesswoman, now committing herself to public policy. And she is an intellectual leader. She is leading the so-called Blue Dogs, which is the moderate Democrats in the House that are trying to chart a sensible path forward. And trade is at the core of that. And no one spends more time thinking about this than Congresswoman Murphy. Would you please, with your warm applause, welcome this remarkable leader, Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate the kind introduction. And thank you to CSIS and JETRO for inviting me to speak. I'm really honored to be here. Given the sizable Japanese presence at this event, I think it's appropriate to begin with a little confession. In the summer after my junior year in college, I actually lived in Japan and worked at Canon, where I was responsible for translating the company's technical documents from English to Japanese. And I'd studied Japanese for about 2 years in college, and I arrived in Tokyo incredibly college confident in my skills. And that confidence faded rather quickly when, after my first translation was returned to me covered in red ink. So it didn't get much better after that. If you have trouble with a Canon copier, you probably can blame me. So I really did, though, despite my language issues. I had a wonderful time in Japan, and I learned so much, including a very valuable lesson in humility. Thankfully, we can now pivot, or maybe it's better to say rebalance, to a discussion from my linguistic shortcomings to a discussion of U.S. economic engagement in the Asia-Pacific region. It's the most economically dynamic region in the world, and by virtually any metric. Like Asia itself, this topic is vast and complex, with 1,000 worthy subtopics to discuss. But I'm going to focus on just 3 interrelated themes. They are the ongoing U.S. efforts to counter an increasingly assertive China through the use of economic statecraft, the January 2017 decision by President Trump to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the President's scattershot tariff policy. Before I go into that, I think it's, if you'll give me some personal privilege to tell you a little bit about myself, I think it's important to start there because they say that where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. And my views on U.S. international economic policy in general and towards Asia specifically are informed by my current position in Congress and by the characteristics of the district that I represent. I'm a moderate Democrat who represents an area in Central Florida, so that Orlando area. It's about a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third independent. And I take real pride in being bipartisan, and I believe that that's been a key to my being effective in Congress. I'll speak up when I believe President Trump or congressional Republicans are wrong, but I don't criticize them reflexively, and I don't take any particular joy in it. Florida is highly dependent on international trade. Trade supports nearly 2.4 million jobs in our state, which is nearly 1 in 5 workers. Florida exports over $50 billion a year in goods and over $40 billion a year in services. And about 30,000 Florida companies import products. Although it's hard to measure with precision, imports keep prices down and increase choice for Florida consumers. With respect to foreign direct investment, foreign-owned companies employ about 350,000 workers in Florida. For example, over 20,000 Floridians work for firms based in Japan. So these data points help explain why I'm proud to describe myself as a pro-trade Democrat. I believe that trade and investment liberalization policies, if crafted in a thoughtful way, can enhance the quality of life for the people I represent. And my constituents don't tend to be hostile or skeptical towards these policies, so long as I, as their representative, detail the many benefits that these policies bring, and honestly discuss the disruptions they may cause in certain sectors, and then work hard to minimize those disruptions rather than being indifferent to them. And that's my general approach, whether we're considering U.S. economic policy towards Asia, Latin America, or any other region of the world. In addition, my views on the value of U.S. engagement in Asia are influenced by my personal background and my professional experience prior to Congress. There's an emotional dimension to my position, and it's not just an intellectual one. So there are 541 members of Congress, and I'm one of only 5 born in the Asia-Pacific, in an Asia-Pacific country. I was born in Vietnam about 3 years after the end of the Vietnam War. I'll save you the trouble of doing the math in your head. I'm just hit the big 4-0 last year. But my parents, because they had been affiliated with the South Vietnamese government and the U.S. military and were being persecuted by the new communist government, decided to escape Vietnam by boat when I was just a baby. And we ran out of fuel in the middle of the South China Sea. And a U.S. Navy ship responded to our SOS call, and they provided us with fuel, food, and water that allowed us to make it to a Malaysian refugee camp. And that moment for me really crystallized what I think makes America great. And it is this unique combination of power and leadership and generosity. It's the power and leadership that deploys the U.S. Navy thousands of miles from the U.S. Borders to ensure freedom of navigation, that international commerce can go on, and that people are safe on the seas. Their forward presence deters conflict. But it's also that generosity that has men and women who were trained for combat decide to extend grace to desperate strangers. And I don't mean to sound sentimental, but I'm alive today because of this unique combination of American leadership and American power and American generosity. And so I think that, as you can imagine, in light of my story, I tend to be really skeptical of arguments made by American politicians, whether they're Republican or Democrat, that the United States should step back from its leadership responsibilities on the global stage. I'm inclined to believe that such a retreat, however tempting it might sound at first blush, would ultimately make America and our allies less prosperous and make the world less stable and safe. My belief in the overriding importance of American leadership, of the judicious use of American power, and of American-led alliances was reinforced as a result of the years I spent working at the Department of Defense after 9/11. During posts at in the Pentagon and out at the U.S. Pacific Command, I helped to shape U.S. military policy and develop partnerships in the Asia-Pacific region. I got an opportunity to help negotiate the U.S.-Singapore Strategic Framework Agreement. I participated in mill discussions between the U.S. Navy and the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces. I helped plan special operations and counterterrorism across Asia, and then authored the guidance that set forth how our military would use its forces in the region. But I'll have to say the most rewarding work that I did was my involvement in the U.S. military's response to the 2004 tsunami in Indonesia, which evolved into a multinational operation featuring countries like Japan and Australia, Singapore, and Malaysia. During my time at DoD, I was reminded again and again how effective the U.S. can be when it sets clear objectives, forms coalitions of willing nations that share those objectives, and leads those coalitions in a strategic and respectful way. And it's a lesson that I take with me into Congress. With that as a backdrop, let me return to the three themes that worry me most about the state of U.S. economic policy in Asia and the connection between them. First is what might be called the X factor, the multidimensional challenge posed by China under Xi Jinping to the U.S.-led international order, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. There's an emerging consensus that the U.S. and China have entered a period defined by confrontation and competition that will be won or lost in that gray area short of kinetic action. At its core, this is a contest over divergent values and interests. It's a contest between opposed political and economic systems and between different visions for the future of Asia and the world writ large. On the political front, it's a contest between authoritarian rule and democratic rule. On the economic front, it's a contest between a state-led model and a market-based model. And it's a contest in which I believe the United States must prevail. To compete effectively with China, it's imperative for the United States to strengthen economic engagement in the Asia-Pacific through increased trade and investment, and not to succumb to protectionist impulses. I would note that every U.S. multinational enterprise worth its salt understands that they cannot be a successful global company unless they have a meaningful presence in Asia or a strategy to attain one. But American firms are working against considerable headwinds emanating out of Washington. And that brings me to the second theme I mentioned, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In one of his first acts in the Oval Office, President Trump withdrew the United States from TPP. The president could have sought to renegotiate aspects of the agreement he didn't like, or he could have sent the agreement to Congress for our review, potential modification, and approval or disapproval. But instead, he made a unilateral decision that's going to have multilateral consequences for years to come. And many of my congressional colleagues on both sides of the aisle have been less than forthcoming on this subject. So let me be clear. I think America's withdrawal from TPP was a serious strategic error. I assume it was met by cheers in Beijing, loud enough to drown out the groans in Tokyo and Hanoi. We had the opportunity to unify the region around an American-designed system of commerce and to check China's rising influence, and we squandered it. Thanks to Japanese leadership, the 11 other TPP nations went ahead with the agreement in our absence, lowering tariffs among themselves and basically leaving American companies at a competitive disadvantage. How anyone could argue this is a result that is in our national best interest is really beyond me. In my view, the U.S. has compounded this error through the president's impulsive use of tariffs on friends and foes alike, which is my third source of concern. I suppose we can have a reasonable debate over the wisdom of President Trump's decision to impose 25% tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese imports and to threaten tariffs on the remaining $300 billion in response to Chinese trade practices that I think nearly everyone agrees are abusive. But for my part, I view tariffs as the foreign policy equivalent of trying to punch someone else and punching yourself harder. Despite the president's constant claims to the contrary, it is American companies and American consumers that bear the brunt of these taxes on imports. And in addition, U.S. exporters have been harmed by China's shrewd application of counter tariffs, raising tariffs only on select products with the United States and lowering tariffs for their other trading partners. With no end in sight to this trade war between the world's two biggest economies, it's never been more vital for the U.S. to work closely with its allies in Asia and Europe who share our concerns about China's unfair trade practices. We should be building a unified coalition along the lines that I used to witness every day at the Department of Defense to maximize the chance of getting China to make real structural changes. But that's not what we're doing. And instead of joining forces to take on China, we're fighting with our friends over secondary issues. And that's because the President has imposed steel and aluminum tariffs on our allies as well as our adversaries, based on a flimsy national security justification. Affected countries have imposed retaliatory tariffs on us, just as the Chinese have. And in some cases, importing firms in these nations have shifted their supply chains in order to source products from other non-tariffed countries. American exporters are paying the price right now, and they may be paying the price well into the future. Even if these various tariff wars come to an end, there's no guarantee that foreign importers will shift their supply chains back to firms in the United States, because we'll become viewed to many as unreliable trading partners. So to be clear, the Chinese are opportunistic. In the same way that they took advantage of the American military's preoccupation in the Middle East over the last 2 decades to vastly advance their own military capabilities, they are now taking advantage of our retreat from the global trading regime to advance their own economic position. If this is what U.S. leadership looks like, we can do better. And if this is what U.S. economic engagement in the Asia-Pacific region looks like, we can do better. And if this is how we intend to prevail in this generational competition against China, we can do better, and we must do better. In summary, I'm concerned that the Trump administration's policies on TPP and tariffs are undermining the effectiveness of our broader policy towards China, which we must get right given the stakes involved for our national security and our economy. And that's one reason I've come to the conclusion that Congress, acting on behalf of the American public, should play a far more muscular role when it comes to U.S. trade and tariff policy. It starts with better and more bipartisan oversight by Congress of the President's trade policies. For example, I think Congress should hold a hearing on the benefits and costs of rejoining TPP and on additional ways to fortify our trading relationships with countries in the region, always in a way that strengthens labor and environment and other standards. We should have the vigorous debate that President Trump unilaterally foreclosed. But I think we have to go beyond this. Over the years, Congress has chosen to delegate much of its constitutional authority to regulate foreign commerce to the executive branch. The current president has used that authority recklessly at best and abused this authority at worst, harming American businesses, consumers, and alliances in the process. I think the time has come for Congress to reclaim its fair share of this authority, so we have a greater say in tariff decisions before they're made, especially tariff decisions that are justified on the dubious national security logic. I intend to introduce legislation in the coming days that would fine-tune the balance of power between Congress and the President. And with that, I want to thank you again for inviting me. I hope you enjoy the rest of today's event. You're discussing incredibly important issues, and I appreciate being here with you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. That was your personal story, your experience in the Defense Department, the strategic, and you didn't mention your business experience, and of course representing your constituency brings